And this module is called the Happiness of Dharma. So from the moment we wake up in the morning until we go to bed at night, everything that we do is motivated by the wish to experience some kind of happiness and to avoid suffering. And most of the time, we're really unconscious of this. It's just instinctive, habitual. We've been doing this in countless lives since beginningless samsara. So, of course, sometimes we are conscious that we're trying to be happy and that we're trying to avoid suffering, and we do everything to achieve these two purposes. But actually, we don't really understand what happiness is, what its causes are, what suffering really involves, what its causes are. And also, although there is this incredibly deep instinct to be happy, to achieve happiness, to have more happiness, we never really think about, we're never really conscious of what happiness we're really trying to achieve. And if we really put our minds to it, we don't want to experience happiness that is just short-lived or incomplete, imperfect. Of course, compared to experiencing obvious suffering, we would prefer some kind of temporary, imperfect happiness. But that is not what we really want. Deep down, what we're really seeking, whether we're conscious of it or not, is a happiness or an experience which we call happiness, which is complete and perfect. Because if it's not complete and perfect, in some way it is frustrating and disappointing, or what the Buddha calls dukkha, or suffering. It's unsatisfying. And that happiness, this perfect, complete experience which we call happiness, we don't want it for just a short time. What we really want is this experience that is complete, perfect, and lasting. Because if it doesn't have those qualities, then it doesn't bring the satisfaction, the peace, the contentment, the well-being that we're really looking for. In other words, it is just some form of suffering. So this perfect, lasting happiness, the Buddha explains, just simply cannot be found in the external world. And this is unfortunately what we as ordinary beings are doing. We are trying to find this happiness in the external world. We've been trying to do this since beginningless time, looking for happiness in relationships with other people, in possessions, in money, power, fame, reputation, and so on. But all of those things depend on, all those experiences of happiness depend on things which themselves are not lasting. They arise depending on causes and conditions, so they are impermanent. So they can't act as the basis for something lasting. They cannot produce lasting happiness. All they can produce, at the very best, if we are lucky, if we're fortunate, is some temporary pleasure, some temporary distraction from our obvious suffering. But for most of us, for most people, much of the time, having not met the Dharma, or having any kind of religious belief, we think only of this life. And so the things of this life become so incredibly important. And we chase after the illusory pleasures of this life and get caught up in them. And because we are so desperate to experience those, and as quickly and easily as possible, then that acts as a condition for all our other negative thoughts, states of mind, of anger, aversion, pride and jealousy, frustration, depression and so on to arise. So Rinpoche in this course points out how the worldly mind thinking only of this life is really, from a Buddhist understanding, simply just creating the cause of suffering. The mind thinking only of this life is not aware, doesn't want to be aware that this mind, this life is just one of what could be an endless series in samsara. The worldly mind doesn't think about death. It doesn't want to think about death. It just focuses on this life and what Rinpoche calls the nearest moment. Our self-cherishing just focuses on the nearest moment. And we want that nearest moment so desperately to be something to do with happiness, to make me happy. But the mind focusing on that focuses on such small things and exaggerates how important they are, believing they're going to bring some very special, wonderful experience. This is the nature of desire. It exaggerates how good things are. The conventional pleasant things of cyclic existence are exaggerated by desire, and they appear permanent. So for the confused mind, thinking only of this life, these things, these experiences seem like happiness, the thing we really want. But it's just an illusion. So when we're only thinking of this life, we get obsessed about me. The central focus is me and how I have to be happy now, quickly, easily. And I, just me, have to avoid suffering as quickly and easily as possible. So that focus, and the trouble is, that thought of I that we are so obsessed with is not who we actually are. We're trying to make an I that doesn't exist happy. Because the I that does exist, that validly exists, is an I that arises depending on the body and mind. It is merely labelled by the mind, depending on the body and mind. So if the mind is confused and disturbed by negative emotions of craving, attachment, aversion and so on, then I am disturbed, I am suffering. Whereas if the mind is in a peaceful state, because virtuous states of mind such as love and compassion are operating, then the I that is merely labelled depending on the mind is at peace, is happy. So the real way to achieve happiness is through the practice of Dharma, because what is Dharma practice all about? It's about the mind. It's about taking care of the mind, and we take care of the mind in two fundamental ways. Protecting the mind from the arising of the disturbing thoughts, particularly craving, attachment and anger. And the other way of taking care of the mind is cultivating the virtuous qualities, particularly love, compassion, wisdom, generosity and so on. Because when those states of mind are operating, then the mind is at peace. So the virtuous minds of love and compassion and so on are reflections of the true nature of our mind. So when they're operating, the mind is at peace, there is a sense of well-being, there is joy, happiness. And the more we can bring those virtuous states of mind to the forefront of our consciousness, then the more happiness there is, the more the disturbing thoughts of that come from just thinking of this life and therefore promote craving, desire, attachment and so on, the more we will actually experience suffering in the moment, but as well, through following those negative actions, we create the cause of suffering to continue in our future lives. But the trouble is, of course, when we are trapped in that worldly mind, thinking of only this life, we're totally unaware of all those things. So what Rinpoche emphasizes in this course is the more we're caught up in that mental state that only thinks of this life, we don't think about the future, but the mind is going to go on. It arises moment by moment. After death, the mind continues on and on. Either it continues in samsara, or through the practice of Dharma, we can free our mind from cyclic existence, and the mind will continue to achieve either the state of blissful nirvana, or what we are encouraged to achieve in the Mahayana is the state of enlightenment. But while we only think of this life, we only think so much about ourselves. We don't think about future lives, we don't think about our effects on others, we don't think of benefiting others. And by just thinking about ourselves and thinking about ourselves in a false way, even though we're not aware that we're thinking about ourselves in a false way, we cultivate unknowingly all the negative states of mind that only bring suffering. But when we start to open up our mind to an awareness of beyond this life, we start to realize that we really have to take care of our mind. Even if there is happiness in the external world, if there is no potential within our mind to experience happiness, that external phenomena can't affect us. So this tends to show that the real source of happiness lies within our mind. There is this amazing potential within our mind for happiness. Similarly, the real source of suffering isn't in the external world, it lies within our mind. If we didn't have the potential for suffering within our mind, how could anything in the external world force our mind to suffer? So if we want real happiness, that means what we really want, whether we know it or not, is the happiness that comes from the Dharma, which comes from taking care of our mind, learning to subdue the disturbing thoughts so that we can eventually eliminate them, and learning to cultivate the positive potentials so that they eventually are fully developed and operating or functioning all the time. And in learning to cultivate those positive potentials, what that really involves is letting go of thinking, of being obsessed with ourself, which is reinforced by only thinking about this life. And what we need to do is to begin to think more about others, to be more and more concerned with others, to let go of our self-cherishing and learn to really cherish others. That seems counterintuitive, that if I cherish others and don't think about myself, I will suffer. But what the Buddha discovered is the more we think about ourselves, the more we unintentionally cultivate our negative states of mind that bring suffering. But the more we think about others and we genuinely start to cherish them, then we begin to experience real peace, real contentment. Because the only way to cherish others is through all the virtuous minds of love, compassion, being patient, sensitive, generous, forgiving, and so on. And these are the virtuous minds that, when they're operating, bring happiness. The moment a virtuous mind is operating, the mind is at peace. There is a sense of well-being, and therefore I am at peace, experiencing well-being. I am happy. So the more we cherish others, the more I experience happiness. This is one of the essential messages of the Buddha. And that happiness that arises from letting go of self-cherishing and learning to cherish others, to cultivate love and compassion, that happiness is something far greater, even in this life, far more satisfying than any kind of worldly pleasures that come from reputation, the sense pleasures, and so on. So in this course, Rinpoche points out at some stage how the worldly pleasure based on the senses related to the external world, they are very temporary, but also they're very limited because they only affect our body to some extent, whereas the pleasure of the mind, the happiness of the mind, pervades our whole being. And although while we are controlled by delusion and karma, even the happiness that arises from the practice of Dharma is temporary. So although we can't expect that the practice of Dharma and the happiness of Dharma we experience as beginners is going to last forever, that happiness is far more satisfying than worldly pleasure, but as well, we are training the mind to be free of all the disturbing thoughts. We are cultivating those positive potentials more and more, so that eventually we will be able to achieve a happiness that is complete, perfect, and lasting. One of the things that Rinpoche emphasizes in this course is how important it is as a Buddhist to recognize the meaning of life. That the meaning of life isn't about just thinking about me and chasing after the pleasures of this life. We've been doing this since beginningless time. And even when we're successful, what we get is so short-lived. The real meaning of life is to benefit others. Because by benefiting others, this brings the greatest satisfaction. It awakens all our positive qualities. It gives us the courage to subdue all the negative aspects of our mind that prevent us doing what is so incredibly beneficial and meaning, benefiting others, repaying the kindness of others. And what we need to recognize is that right now, having met the Buddha Dharma, we have a precious human rebirth, the optimum chance to work with our mind, the optimum chance to begin to experience the happiness of Dharma, which is real happiness, the genuine thing that we've been seeking since beginningless time, but not knowing how to experience. So the precious human rebirth involves having met the Dharma, having met spiritual masters, having a basically healthy body and mind, and all the conditions to practice. So we have those things, so we really need to recognize it and take advantage of it. so that we can really begin to experience what we've always been seeking: genuine, lasting happiness, the happiness of Dharma. And that an experience that will not only benefit ourselves, but as we train our mind, develop our mind, eliminate the negative qualities that restrict all our positive potentials, we will be able to be of greater and greater benefit to others. And that itself, knowing that we're doing that, knowing that we're not harming others, but actually beginning to be able to be a genuine benefit of others, that also brings incredible happiness, incredible satisfaction. That's what it's all about. Really just following the self-cherishing thought of satisfying the ego is ultimately such an incredibly deadening, isolating experience. But when we can connect with all others and relate to all others and dedicate our life to others, making others experience happiness, protecting them from experiencing suffering, even if we're not able to do it very well now, or even if we're not able to do it very well at all right now, but even trying to do that, knowing that we're doing something really meaningful, that itself is satisfying. That itself brings a type of happiness that far outweighs any worldly pleasures. This is what Rinpoche is emphasizing in this course. When our mind is just focused on this life, then all of the things of this life seem so incredibly important, and we get caught up in what are called the 8 worldly concerns, which is the grossest expression of our self-cherishing thought. So the 2 basic worldly concerns are craving happiness and fearing suffering. But the happiness that we crave is not, in this case, is not this pure, perfect happiness that we instinctively are seeking. It is a distorted form of that, distorted by self-cherishing into just believing that any distraction from that subtle dissatisfaction we're always experiencing, any distraction from that is happiness. And if we can achieve it quickly and easily, then that's really wonderful. So that's what we crave in our confusion, and that's what we label as happiness. And the more we do that, we create the opposite mindset, which is fearing suffering. The more we crave instant satisfaction, instant entertainment, the more we crave things going the way I want, the more we set up the opposite mind that can't bear problems, discomfort, things going the way I don't want them to. And the more we get caught up in those 2 mindsets, craving instant satisfaction, fearing suffering, the more we are trapped into believing it's okay to engage in negative actions to achieve what we want. Our self-cherishing tells us that anything we do to get this instant satisfaction, anything we do to stop this suffering is okay. Especially because we don't think about the consequences in future lives. Our self-cherishing doesn't even allow us to think about the suffering results later in this life. So because of those two basic worldly concerns, we have all these other worldly concerns of craving getting stuff, believing that will make us happy. And the more we crave getting stuff, the more we create the opposite mindset that fears not getting stuff or fears losing what we already have. And again, the more we're caught up into those two mindsets, the more our self-cherishing convinces us it's perfectly okay to do anything to achieve those two goals. Our self-cherishing creates these illusions, these lies that constantly cheat us, that lead us to engage in negative actions that bring suffering. Then, because of those two basic worldly concerns of craving happiness, fearing suffering, we also crave having a good reputation, of being accepted into some kind of group, being admired and so on. And the more we crave that good reputation and being loved and lovable, the more we create the opposite mindset of fearing having a bad reputation, of not being loved, of not being accepted, not being admired and so on. And again, the more we're caught up in those two mindsets, our self-cherishing convinces us that it's perfectly okay to do anything negative to achieve those goals. Thinking and our self-cherishing creates the illusion that in following those things, doing anything to achieve those goals, we will be happy. But in fact, we're creating the causes of suffering for ourselves, suffering for others, now and in the future. So the final two of the 8 worldly concerns are craving praise, thinking this will bring me happiness. And the more we have that craving for praise, the more we create the opposite mindset of fearing criticism. And again, the more we're caught up in those, our self-cherishing convinces us it's perfectly okay to do anything to achieve those two goals. Because by achieving those goals, our self-cherishing tells us, it lies to us so convincingly that then we will be happy. Doesn't matter what we do, it doesn't matter. As long as we achieve those goals, it's okay. But it's all a lie. It's just creating more suffering, more confusion. So Rinpoche points out how real happiness starts the moment we give up the 8 worldly concerns. If you check, in the Lam Rim teachings, it points out how all our suffering comes, or the suffering of the lower realms, suffering in this life, comes from engaging in the 10 non-virtuous actions. What motivates the 10 non-virtuous actions is our self-cherishing, our 8 worldly concerns. So all good rebirths, all happiness come from engaging in the 10 virtuous actions. And if you check up what motivates each of the 10 virtuous actions, is that at least for the few moments we engage in the action, for example, of not killing, not stealing, not engaging in sexual misconduct and so on, in those moments we're not thinking about me now, wanting this instant satisfaction, we're thinking about other. And by thinking about others, being more concerned, even just for a short time, about their well-being rather than our momentary instant satisfaction, the moment we do that, we engage in virtuous actions, we give rise to our virtuous minds, which engage in virtuous actions, which bring happiness now and create imprints that ripen as even greater happiness in the future. So this is the happiness of Dharma.